We'll backtrack and then we're going to move forward. If we backtrack, we look at the fact that all of these loans were packaged up in the beginning. The rating agencies, of course, were in the back pocket of many of these firms who were lobbying essentially to get AAA paper on that. And if they didn't get AAA paper, the rating agencies may not get their high fees.
Correct.
So it really was a very horrible system, which, of course, the taxpayers at the end were put on the line to through a TARP bailout and other types of bailouts that occurred on Wall Street. I guess the one of the challenges that I have with the whole thing is the banks, they were saved more than anything due to the mark-to-market rules. I'm sure if mark-to-market was around at the beginning, Lehman Brothers wouldn't have collapsed if they had to put that in place. But we got to remember that the Treasury, the head of the Treasury, or the Treasury Secretary at that time, Paulson, it could be argued maybe he was competitive with Lehman Brothers, and it may have not made sense or been in the interest of his connections to have had Lehman Brothers survive. Certainly an area of discussion.
Right.
Now, where we're at right now is we then advance. There's a bailout. The bankers, I think there's a lot of animosity, a lot of frustration out there, because what bankers have essentially done is, instead of when they got their money and their stocks went from $60 down to $20, but they started to become profitable again because of the mark-to-market rules. A large part of that, they could put the future value of the mortgage on their financial statement instead of what it actually is worth. What's happened now is we're looking at a situation where they get back on their feet, and then the economy with all the stimulus starts to roll, and then the bankers say, hey, look, our stock price went from $20 to $30. Let's reward ourselves. Now we've paid back the TARP loans. Let's reward ourselves handsomely for the great job we did. They're not saying that our stock dropped from 60 down to 20. It's gone from 20 back to 30.
Right.
And then we saw some of the biggest bonuses ever issued out of Wall Street. And I know that I certainly lost any desire, because of the conduct of bankers in this country, to look at any further type of bailout. But the problem that's happening right now with the lending, beyond the ethics of the bankers in this country, led by J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and it goes on, is the fact that we really do have a situation where they can't lend. The way they're making money is they're squeezing consumers through 2 percentage point increases in credit card rates over the last 2 months, and they're squeezing consumers through higher bank fees, and that's just the reality of what's going on. Then they take this profit and they use it and they set it against future write-downs on mortgages, and they only write down a certain amount each month, so that the release into the market's a very slow period of time. So that's where we are right now, coming up to date. Now we're at a situation, and this is where you're the expert. This is where you're on the cutting edge. This is where you're out at the conferences. Now we're at a situation where we find out that in this foreclosure mill, they started to put all of these foreclosure papers in front, and the judge would say, look, you got to have all your paperwork in order. So all these banks realized that they had to have their paperwork in order, so they sent it off to companies that specialize in creating documentation that didn't exist in order to basically be able to complete the foreclosure. And so you have these people sometimes in a room literally stamping the same person 10,000 foreclosure notices a month. It was insane. That's where we're at today. That's where this gentleman is an expert. Go ahead and take it from there, Steve.
Well, the like you're talking about the mark-to-market before, that has led us up to this, because some banks could have survived without the mark-to-market, the easing of the mark-to-market, and that what we have to understand now is, if the easing of the mark-to-market wasn't put in place, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Because the homes would have been foreclosed on in a timely fashion. That slowed it down. And now we've had time to, lawyers, attorneys have had time to look at it. The banks, the current banks right now, most of them didn't originate these loans. Now they have the problem that they purchased or inherited from the originators. And now with the mark-to-market, they're slowing it down, like you said, to keep their capital high enough, so they're still solvent because TARP was not successful on doing their loan because the assets. So now it's giving people time to look at what the correct paperwork is being done. The paperwork wasn't done originally most of the time correct. So now the laws that were put in place for hundreds of years were not kept up with electronic technology. Because a lot of times these things were recorded electronically, but not at the county. So depending on what judge you get in a judiciary state, and depending on a non-judiciary state, how the state laws are written, a lot of these foreclosures are considered illegal or incorrect because it doesn't follow the process of law. So there was these third-party companies that were hired by these banks, because banks aren't in the business of foreclosing on people. They hire outsourcers and attorneys. These outsourcers and attorneys were paid to foreclose in a timely fashion on the people that need to be foreclosed on. Well, they couldn't get all the correct paperwork a lot of the times, many times. So what they did is they recreated this paperwork like you were discussing based on the recorded documents. So they would record the documents, and then many times they would have a Robo. That's where the Robo signers come into play.
Explain your Robo signer. So everyone, that's a new term, a new word just invented recently. Yeah. Robo signer. Go ahead.
A Robo signer is someone that signs a document that makes it an original. Let's say the judge needs an original document. It makes it a wet signature. So if they need the documentation, for example, MERS. A lot of times MERS allows you, MERS owns the loan. This is, since we're short on time, we'll make this real quick. But MERS allows an employee from another company to be an employee of theirs in order to foreclose on a property, or an independent contractor. So many times these documents will have the vice president of MERS or the employee of MERS, also the employee of the institution, of the outsourcer, of the attorney or the outsourcer that was hired by the bank. Therefore, if they really look closely, you're going to have, sometimes there was signatures of the notary, the MERS employee, and the outsourcer that was hired by the bank, all the same person. Or different names, but all the same signature.
Yeah.
You're signing $5,000. So even if the person still owes the debt, you still have to follow the rule of law. And if the rule of law isn't followed, you're going to get chaos. And we're on the verge of chaos right now because homeowners are going back and taking their houses back, and the police in some local areas aren't even enforcing it because they're saying go see a judge. And just today, the sheriff, I believe, of Chicago said, I'm not going to foreclose on anybody or evict anybody because I don't know if this paper is correct. I can't legally or ethically foreclose on this. This is a whole city of Chicago that the sheriff has now stopped. He has no authority to do that, but he's doing it because he doesn't know if this paperwork is legitimate and legal because of all this paperwork that wasn't done correctly. Not 6 months ago, not 12 months ago. Most of this paperwork was done wrong 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And a lot of the securitization process, they don't even know who's the correct owner. And now there's affidavits and depositions that have come out in the Taylor Bean right now. Taylor Bean was one of the largest lenders in the country before their breakdown. They are now starting to see in that case if there was some of these mortgage-backed securities that were sold not once, not twice, but 3 different times. So if you're the holder of this mortgage-backed security, and he's the holder of the mortgage-backed security, and she's the holder of this mortgage-backed security, and there's only one house, and this house gets foreclosed on, who gets paid?
Well,
you have ownership, they have ownership, and they have ownership. And they have documentation to show that they all have ownership. That is going to be a problem, no matter how you look at it.
It's actually going to be it's going to be a huge problem, and you know, I really go back to, and then I'm going to, I like going back and come forward. I go back to just the fact of the accountability and how this all played out. I mean, the fact that we had so many of these bankers and so many of these companies that were put in a position to put the taxpayer in bailing out hundreds of billions of dollars, yet their personal net worth increased.